Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. And we are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey there, all you porcupines, this is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the New Hampshire Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Thank you so much for joining us today for episode 79 of the Porcupine Report. Of course, we bring you a new episode every single Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m., and you can find the Porcupine Report on the Free State Project channels on Facebook, X, YouTube, Spotify. Wherever you enjoy watching or listening to this show, please go ahead and do me a kind favor. Leave a like or a positive comment. Share it with your friends. And if you're willing to go to the next level, which I very much encourage you to do, go to fsp.org and sign up for the weekly newsletter that I write every single week. I guarantee you will love receiving this email newsletter. And I will say there are many folks in the Free State movement currently who don't realize that they are already receiving this newsletter, but sometimes it gets sent into the spam folder, even though it's not spam. Can you believe that Gmail would do this to us? These Google executives, boy, they don't want you hearing about all the wins that are happening in New Hampshire. So if you think you might already be signed up for it, but you're not receiving it, check your spam folder and whitelist it so that you start getting that right in your main inbox. And if you aren't signed up, go to fsp.org and sign up for our weekly Free State Project newsletter. You will love it. I guarantee it. It is chock full of so many events that are coming up. You're always going to get the weekly episode of this show right into your inbox and some fun stories that are happening in and around New Hampshire and the larger Free State movement. Before we get into some other topics for today, let me tell you, of course, about our sponsor, which is Porcupine Coffee Roasting. Sometimes you can have it as a hot coffee, sometimes as an iced coffee. I'm enjoying it nice and cold today. Porcupine Coffee Roasting is not just coffee, it is a revolution in your mug, proudly operated by Free Staters in the Free State. They roast only specialty grade beans from small producers, always fresh, roasted in small batches to order with a roast date you can trust. No stale beans from these Liberty lovers. Porcupine Coffee Roasters is all about sovereignty, a private membership association. They embody the live free or die ethic, giving freedom-minded folks like you a way to choose liberty with every sip. Now, here is the deal. Use code PORCREPORT at porcupinecoffeeroasting.com for 15% off your order of individual products. And a portion of your purchase will go to support this very program. So that's a win for you. You get great coffee, a win for some great Free Staters operating Porcupine Coffee Roasting, and a win for the show that you love so much. So it's a win-win-win. So go ahead and do that, porcupinecoffeeroasting.com. Use discount code PORCREPORT for 15% off individual orders. Live free, drink free, stay caffeinated, my friends. All right. Some other things to discuss before we get to our great interview we're going to have today with a good friend of mine. I'll be telling you about him in a moment. We have a number of events coming up in the Free State. Of course, there are always many numerous events happening all the time, from meetups to rucking groups to you name it. You should always be checking the Free State Project calendar at fsp.org. But I want to tell you about three big ones that I hope that you are marking your calendar for. The first is this month, September 21st. So that's just a few weeks away. Our first annual Granite Freedom Trek. We're going to be doing a 5-mile hike around two of the mountains. Starting in Alexandria, New Hampshire. We have a professional guide. With your ticket, you get a free T-shirt and a drink ticket at our after party event. This is a great opportunity for those who love freedom and community and the great outdoors to come and do a wonderful hike, rain or shine, as the fall season begins to arrive upon us. with some people who share your values. So come on out, get your tickets at fsp.org/trek. Tickets are $35, but it's a finite supply because it's nice to keep a hiking group small, so you're not stopping for every couple of minutes. So limited tickets are on sale. I hope you will join us. This is great for if you're already active in the Free State movement here in New Hampshire. It's great for you, but we also would love it if some of our friends from out of state came out to join us. So this is great if you're in Vermont or Maine or Massachusetts and you just want to come up to New Hampshire for the day for a nice 5-mile hike with some friends. The Granite Freedom Trek is for you. And in October, now Columbus Day weekend is getting very busy. There's a lot of events happening Columbus Day weekend, particularly. The first one I want to tell you about is going to be on the Sunday of Columbus Day weekend, and that is the Free State Bitcoin Digital Asset Conference. This is hosted by our friends, Bruce and Carol Ann Fenton. It's going to be October 12th in Newcastle, New Hampshire. There's going to be cutting edge talks on the state of cryptocurrency and digital assets. If this is your jam, you want to be here for this. And as a special thank you to you for being a viewer or a listener to the Porcupine Report, you can use our discount code FSPFriend and you'll get 50% off your ticket at blockchainnh.com. So FSPFriend for 50% off. And I'd love to see you there. I'll be speaking at this event, and so I'll get to see you personally if you come on out. So be sure to join us for that. That's going to be great. And that same weekend, we have a whole series of events with our Fall Fest in the Free State being hosted by our friends at Independence Realty Group. This is a variety of family-friendly events taking place across the 3 days of the long Columbus Day weekend. We're talking corn mazes, apple picking, an arcade day at the world's largest arcade, and axe throwing, and a host of family-friendly events, including a family-friendly hike. Maybe that 5-mile Granite Freedom Trek hike is too much for your 5-year-old kid, but I promise you can bring them out to the family-friendly hike at Fall Fest. So you're going to want to learn more. And if you go to fsp.org/fallfest, that will redirect you right to the Independence Realty Group's site with more details on all those events, some of which you can pre-register for. So be sure to do that. And I know a lot of families are looking forward to coming out for Fall Fest. So those are just some of our big events coming up. And of course, always check out the Free State Project calendar at fsp.org. And I will see you at some events. Before we get into our conversation, there's one other story I want to address, which is something that my former governor, thankfully she's not my governor anymore, my former governor from Maine, Janet Mills, was recently doing an interview with a reporter from NPR. And she had some not so nice things to say about New Hampshire. Well, our producer for this show, Renita, put together a really great video to punch back and set the record straight. So, Renita, let's play that video.
We only border one other state, and we don't necessarily like them, New Hampshire.
Governor Mills mocks her neighbors in New Hampshire, while Maine's early education ranks among the worst in the nation. Infrastructure, dead last nationwide, with crumbling roads and unreliable power. Hospitals that fired unvaccinated nurses over Mills' mandate now beg them to return amid shortages. But look across the border. New Hampshire leads the way. New Hampshire pioneered the first state crypto reserve law. We require proof of U.S. citizenship for voter registration. Senate Bill 295 made education freedom accounts universal. We topped the 2024 Economic Freedom of North America report as the freest state, far ahead of Maine in New England metrics. We've also repealed annual vehicle inspections to cut regulatory burdens. New Hampshire, live free or die. Maine, time for change? New Hampshire thrives with freedom and opportunity. Maine should take a page from New Hampshire's playbook.
Can you believe that? Well, we shared that video on our social media pages, And particularly on Facebook and TikTok, this video really took off with a lot of people in Maine who were wondering what in the world was Janet Mills talking about. People complain in Maine about the encroaching influence of the progressive nanny state culture of Massachusetts. But my 12 years in politics in Maine, I rarely heard anyone complaining about New Hampshire. I think who's really upset about New Hampshire is the Democratic political establishment, because New Hampshire stands as a counterexample to everything that they push on the people of Maine. As Maine has embraced welfare statism, nanny statism, corporate cronyism, Maine has continued to get worse and worse in terms of higher taxes, failing healthcare. The education scores are the lowest on record. And now even their gun rights are coming under assault in Maine, which has for the longest time, Maine has been very proud to have, strong Second Amendment rights. Even that's coming under assault. And so I think who really is frustrated by New Hampshire are the Democrat leaders in Maine, who New Hampshire is just this pesky neighbor that is proving that freedom works as their big government policies continue to fail the people. And the more the people realize and notice that freedom works, the more they demand freedom. So Janet Mills, I know we went over to the gun show in Augusta, Maine the other week, and we're going to be doing some more gun shows around the New England area, including in Maine in the coming weeks. And not a single person thought New Hampshire was the problem. They thought Janet Mills was the problem. So I think she presumes too much when she seeks to speak for all Maine people, because the Maine people that we keep hearing from on social media think that Maine and New Hampshire's are the two places where that revolutionary spirit is still alive, and we're brothers against that encroaching nanny statism that Janet Mills represents. So we'll keep doing outreach to the folks in Maine and to those folks who are still stuck under the tyranny of Janet Mills and this totalitarian state government there. Well, I hope that you come and visit us in New Hampshire and get a taste of what freedom can be like. Thank you, Renita, for putting together that video. All right, let's get into our conversation for today. So our guest today is been a friend for many years. He's doing some very interesting things around the liberty movement around the country. He was the 2020 vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. And after that, he founded an organization called You Are the Power, which is working with activists around the country to hold local and I think now state government officials to some degree accountable for bad behavior. We had him on the show. Oh, it's been a couple of months now. I'm sure he's got a lot of new stuff to tell us about. Let's welcome to the Porcupine Report, Spike Cohen.
Hey man, how are you doing? Good to see you.
I'm doing well. I know that you were just here in New Hampshire. We were like ships passing in the night. We were both speaking at the Young Americans for Liberty Hazlitt Summit in New Hampshire, in Manchester, New Hampshire, with some state legislators. I know I had to rush out to get to this gun show in Augusta and do some outreach there. How was your experience during your brief New Hampshire visit recently?
It was great. It was great to speak at the Hazlitt Summit. And for those who don't know, the Hazlitt Summit, the Hazlitt Coalition is a coalition of legislators, state level legislators who are in a coalition with Young Americans for Liberty, who want to pass liberty friendly legislation in their state legislature. And we had, I think, just over 24, or just shy of 30, it's like 28 legislators there in New Hampshire. Got to develop some relationships there. Got to also talk with them about the work that we've been doing with state legislators in other states and how we can work together with them there.
I know I appreciated Young Americans for the Free State Project was a sponsor of this event, and I know I had a good talk with the legislators there about my thoughts on why stoicism at the State House is essential to stay kind of principled. And we had a good talk about Defend the Guard. And I pitched several of these legislators on becoming patrons for the Free State Project, which is, by the way, to our audience, you can do for $10 a month or $100 a year. And to help us cover the expense of sponsoring this event. And I appreciate several of them came through, which, considering the full legislative salary in New Hampshire for an entire year is $100. They basically donated their entire annual salary to the Free State Project for $100. So I appreciate those individuals doing so.
It's $200 for the 2 terms, but they also get mileage refund for.
They do,
and they literally
and tolls. And
you have to state anytime that you did ride share, because they won't reimburse you for that. So it's only if you use your own vehicle, they will reimburse it. No carpooling, guys. So that's great. If only the state government there were as tight spending on that with everything, you'd have a budget of like $50,000 a year. Be easy to pay it off. It'd be pretty straightforward.
There are some legislators who argue that when this was written, that it was supposed to be $100 a year. We were on the gold standard, and $20 was an ounce of gold. So they've argued maybe we should be getting paid 5 ounces of gold a year. But I actually think maybe to some degree the low salary has worked to the advantage of libertarians, because it is only the most passionate who will sign up to serve.
Exactly.
You don't serve in the legislature to make a living like some other states.
You aren't getting rich there. No. But it was a really great thing. I really appreciate You Were the Power or Young Americans for Liberty for putting it together. And we've actually we had attended their Hazlitt Summit in Tennessee last year, and we hope to be at the rest of them as well. It's a great opportunity for activists and advocates in the liberty sphere to interact with legislators in the liberty sphere and see how we can work together.
Yeah. Well, Spike, so tell me a little bit. Well, let's talk about You Are the Power. What is going on with You Are the Power these days? You got some victories to tell us about? I guess for those who aren't familiar with the organization, maybe you should introduce it first.
Yeah, so at You Are the Power, we find people who are having their lives upended by out-of-control local and statewide government officials and bad policy, and usually both, corrupt officials and bad policy. And what we do is we create viral content about those families and individuals who are having their lives ruined, and we get the public on their side, but we don't just tell them about it. We tell them the specific people in government who are doing it to them, the city council people, the zoning board members, the CPS agents, the family court judges, whoever it is that's targeting them. And then we give them an easy way to contact all of those people and tell them to back off and do the right thing and leave these people alone. And that sounds like something an 8-year-old would come up with, like, why don't we just go and tell them not to do that? But it actually works. We've had a 100% success rate for the last 2 years. We have reunited families. We have kept people's homes from being stolen. We're working on keeping a family farm from being stolen. We've even gotten legislation passed in Georgia with more legislation in other states soon to come. We've done all sorts of incredible. We've got charges dropped. We've gotten corrupt officials to resign all across the country, and all sorts of stuff. And it's all based on the idea of finding people who aren't being treated like people by their government. They're being treated like a funding mechanism or a political obstacle or something other than a person. And so we just go to these officials and say, hey, you wouldn't want anyone doing this to you. You have the agency to not do this, so don't do it. And it turns out if you insistently and persistently keep demanding that they do it, they either realize they did the wrong thing and back off for entirely political expediency reasons, or they resign. And so we've been winning. Like I said, we've won every single time for the last 2 years now. And for the entire time our organization's been around, we've had a more than 90% success rate.
Well, certainly kind of success rates are really nice to hear in the abstract, but tell us about an individual story that people might give people a sense of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. A number sounds great and it looks good on a chart, but what really matters is what's actually happening. So I'll tell you a story about the first family that we found out about that was dealing with a really pernicious thing that's being done in all 50 states. Their name is the Hernandez family, Matt and Tucky Hernandez, and their 2 children, Emma and Aria. Matt and Tucky had their kids. Emma was a baby at the time. She was only a few months old, and she was starting to have swelling in her legs, and she was acting fussy. And so Matt and Tucky took her to the Children's Hospital in Atlanta, and they did a bunch of tests, and they did an X-ray. They did, I think, multiple X-rays of her legs and of her body. The tests ended up coming back demonstrating that she had chronic health conditions that were causing her injuries. But before those came back, a so-called child abuse pediatrician, and we'll talk more about that in a bit, took a look at her X-ray and said, yep, looks like abuse to me. And without waiting for the results to come in to see if there was any other explanation for this, or reviewing her medical records or anything else to see if there was any other possible reason to look into this, this child abuse pediatrician accused them of abuse. They were both arrested for abuse. Both of their children were taken from them, even though the arresting officer didn't think they did anything wrong, and the CPS worker reviewed their house and said, they don't look like there's anything wrong here. They still took both kids from them. They also, as a condition of their bond, they weren't allowed to, the husband and wife, Matt and Tucky, weren't allowed to speak with each other or be within a certain number of feet of each other indefinitely. There was no end date to this. So not only did they lose their children overnight, they lost each other. Their entire family was gone from them. They weren't allowed to access their kids' medical records because they were pretty sure that they knew that they didn't abuse their kids, and there had to be some kind of explanation. So they spent tens of thousands of dollars in court to fight to get their own kids' medical records. They finally did get the medical records. When they did, they then took them to medical experts who said, yeah, no, she definitely has chronic health conditions. There is no sign of abuse. There's no trauma or anything like that that would signal abuse. This is obviously a health problem, not an abuse issue. And they said, oh, thank God, we're going to take this to family court. This was all a big misunderstanding. We'll get our kids back. Family court judge refused to allow the testimony to be admitted. And none of the medical experts were allowed to testify. None of that was admitted. None of the medical records were admitted. All that was allowed to be admitted was the so-called child abuse pediatrician, who brought no paperwork, did not seem familiar with the case, and said the only evidence that he had was, well, yeah, when you look at these types of these injuries, statistically, they tend to be caused by abuse. When he was asked for to cite the source of that statistic, he went, oh, you can look it up on the internet. That was the only thing the judge allowed to be entered as the evidence for whether or not Emma Hernandez had been abused. On the strength of that evidence, the judge ordered non-reunification, which meant that Matt and Tucky would face never seeing their children again, and that they would be placed permanently for adoption. Thankfully, one of the foster parents who temporarily had these children did some searching of her own. Her name is Jennifer Williams. She and her husband, Jonathan, had been foster parents for over a decade, I think 13 years, 14 years, something like that. And they saw that it didn't seem like they were being abused. Aria, the older child, kept asking when she could see her parents again, that she missed her mom and dad. Where are they? She wants to see them. And Emma seemed like there was something wrong with her physically, and there didn't seem to be any sign of abuse. She looked on the internet and found these parents talking about the fact that the court wouldn't allow them to submit any of this medical testimony or any of that stuff. And so she contacted DFACS, which is the Georgia State CPS agency. It's called the Division of Family and Children's Services, DFACS. And so she contacted them and said, I'm pretty sure that these kids aren't being abused, and maybe you should look into this again. Their response was, give the kids back. Your 13 years of service are no longer needed. Now, this is in a state that is desperate for foster families, unless you speak out and say something's wrong. Thankfully, she contacted us. We heavily vetted this cause to make sure it was legit. And we jumped on it. Once we found out that this was as bad as it looked, then we put the content out there, let everyone know about it. And three things happened. First thing was, tens of thousands of people angrily contacted the CPS agent, the CPS agent's supervisor, the family court judge, everyone else involved, and said, back off and give these kids back. The second thing that happened was everyone just kind of backed off inexplicably. Out of nowhere, the judge did a complete 180 and said, actually, I'm ordering reunification. I'm going to let these kids go back. Once the criminal charges are dropped, they can go back for good, but we're not going to take the kids away. They can stay with family. And this was all a big misunderstanding. DFACS dropped their case as well. That was the second thing that happened. The third thing that happened was families came from out of the woodwork with the exact same story all across the country. The kid had a chronic health condition, usually something like Ehlers-Danlos or something like that causes fractures and bruising. They were wrongfully accused of abuse. Some of them were able to successfully get their kids. Some of them lost their kids forever. Some of them actually pleaded guilty and faced small amounts of jail time to be able to potentially see their kids again, even though they knew they did absolutely nothing wrong. And then we found out the reason why this is happening. Under Title 4E of the Social Security Act, the federal government is subsidizing CPS agencies every time they accuse someone of abuse, and only every time they accuse someone of abuse. And if they turn out to have a health condition, they give them way more money. So when the system, the child abuse pediatricians, the CPS caseworkers, the family court judges, the foster care centers, the visitation centers, everything in that complex of child protection, when they see a kid with a chronic health condition who has fractures and bruising, instead of seeing a kid that needs help, they see the maximum amount of funding that they can possibly get. And all they have to do is destroy a family in the process. So fast forward to just over a year and a half after we found out about this, we were able to successfully have them exonerated in court, in criminal court. Their family court case was dropped. And Matt and Tucky are living as husband and wife together with Emma and Aria back in their home. This nightmare is behind them. In addition to that, we've been able to reunite multiple other families in Georgia and across the country. We were able to pass a law called Ridge's Law in Georgia, named after Ridge Collins, a child who was taken from his parents for, I believe, 1,000 days before they finally gave him back, that we were able to help with that. And it was signed into law. It was passed unanimously. Initially, there was no appetite for any kind of reform at all until this content came out and the public started demanding it. They suddenly did, passed it unanimously. The governor immediately signed it into office with the families in his office while he's signing it and everything else. That's the political expediency part. And now we have lawmakers reaching out to us across the country, seeing how they can fix it in their state as well. That all started with one family who faced losing everything.
Wow. Now, I have to imagine that, a law that creates an incentive structure like this, you want to think that maybe it started with the best of intentions. Maybe it was like, these are the worst possible cases. Someone who is being abused and they have chronic health issues. Like we need to give funding to programs to support these worst cases. But I imagine it's like I always remember my friend Andrew Heaton doing a show about, I think it was in like Vietnam when they tried to the French government was in control of Vietnam, and they had a rat problem, so they started paying people bounties on rats that they killed and brought in, and this actually led people to breed rats and then sell them, right? Yep. So they ended up with a bigger rat they ended up with more of a problem than the problem they started out with, right? Because these are the problems with poorly thought out incentive structures. Or to take a more American case, I mean, it's hard not to hear this and think about, the stories you'd hear. I remember hearing in American history class during the era of slavery that, judges were literally paid more to find, to declare that someone needed to be returned into slavery than to be free. So these incentive structures matter.
Yep. You subsidize slavery, you get more slaves. You subsidize rats, you get more rats. Turns out if you subsidize abuse allegations, you're going to get a lot more abuse allegations. And the flip side problem of that, and we're seeing this in New Hampshire as well, and across the country. New Hampshire, this is not a unique thing to New Hampshire or Georgia. It's all across the country because this is at its core a federal problem, or a federal incentive problem. What we're seeing across the country is that these CPS agents, and CPS is Child Protective Service for those who don't know, and it's called something different in each state, so we just call it CPS. So these CPS caseworkers are told, you have to find a certain number of children that we can plausibly accuse of being abused every month, or you're fired. So there's this quota system because they already know that they need to spend X amount of money and they need X amount of budget from the federal government. And so they need X amount of accusations, whether or not there's that many abusers. And so what happens is, instead of actually looking for abusers who typically don't take their children to a children's hospital after they abuse them, right? Like if they're not completely covering their tracks, they're at least not going to be nearly as forthcoming as an innocent family who just wants to get to the bottom of this and find out why their kid is injured or sick or whatever else. So instead what happens is they're going after innocent people, and less they're going after fewer and fewer actual abusers. And the problem is that actually works in the CPS agency's favor, because if the amount of abuse continues going up, then they can go to the public and say, look, Look at all these children we've taken from abusive families, and yet the number of abuse keeps going up and up and up. We need even more funding to be able to find all these terrible abusers that live in our neighborhoods. And so they actually have, again, you want to talk about perverse incentives, and this is typical of government agencies. They actually have a perverse incentive for the problem to get worse because it's easier for them to convince the public that they need even more money. And all they have to do is put aside their humanity and look at these families as something other than people or something other than a family, and just look at them as, well, this is, an egg we got to break to make an omelet, or whatever they tell themselves. This is the lesser evil we have to, whatever they tell themselves, to justify focusing their time on finding children with injuries, even if they aren't being caused by abuse, instead of finding actual abusers. They should be looking for abuse. Instead, they look for plausible allegations that they can easily make so they can move on to the next one, because they gotta make a bunch of them this month or this quarter.
Wow. It really does make you wonder what someone in that situation who's participating in that does tell themselves. What is the narrative they tell themselves to convince themselves they're the good guy in this situation? Because everyone has to, I think to some degree, we got to believe that about ourselves, or how would we sleep at night? Maybe they tell themselves, well, if it wasn't me doing this, someone else would be, and it's just it's just being a cog in a machine. And if it weren't me collecting this paycheck for doing evil, someone else would be. So
and this is how we get our funding, and I didn't make it this way. Someone else created it this way, and this is how we get our funding. And hey, you know what? Maybe the doctor's wrong. Maybe it was caused by abuse. And that doctor, what do they know? It's all these things you got to tell yourself, which is why we've actually been, the natural reaction you have to this is to say things to the people doing it that maybe aren't the most productive things. You might even consider wanting to do things to them. But what we've learned is that when we contact them, and this is tough, but we contact them respectfully and appeal to their humanity, it actually works better than when we used to, 3-4 years ago, when we used to be more aggressive in how we'd approach them. Now, when we approach them saying, listen, these are all the facts. You're not in the right here. You have the agency to do the right thing here. This family deserves better, or this small business, or whoever it is we're helping in whatever situation is. These people deserve better. They deserve to be treated the way that you wouldn't want to be treated in this situation. And you have the opportunity to do that. So do that so we can thank you for it. And it sounds sappy. It sounds like I hear 2-3 years ago, if I had heard that, I'd be like, oh yeah, tell me how that works. Again, 100% success rate. Now, is some of it where for political expediency, they suddenly decide they were on our side? Yeah. Okay. We still won. Is it sometimes where they resign in disgrace because they can't even bring themselves to do the right thing, and so whoever replaces them does the right thing? Yeah. Okay. Again, we win. Every once in a while, we have a situation like in Georgia where the head of defects, Candace Brose, after seeing some of our content and seeing about the families that were being affected by her agency, and watching a documentary about the same thing, about the families we were working with, she contacted us privately, not publicly. She didn't put some political thing out and go, oh, I'm deeply disturbed about this, so I'm looking into it. She privately contacted us and said, I had no idea. How do we fix this? And so we're like, okay. So we gave her basically a bulleted list of, this is what you need to implement immediately to solve most of this. It's a federal issue, but these few changes you can make immediately, and they will eliminate the vast majority of these false allegations. And she did it. And again, with no fanfare, she just put out a memo to all the different children's hospitals and all the different caseworkers saying, this is the policy moving forward. Parents always have access to their kids' medical records, even if they're accused of abuse. They should be able to get a second opinion as long as the medical professional is certified in the state of Georgia. Doesn't even have to be in Georgia. They can be in Florida and some other areas as well, but it has to be a credible doctor. And anyone who accuses a child of abuse, or accuses a parent of abusing a child based on medical records, needs to testify that they reviewed the child's medical history first before they made that accusation. Those three things fixes the vast majority of this. And so she implemented that immediately. We are the ones that went public explaining it, that this is what happened. And she's been faithfully executing it. Then she helped us on Capitol Hill in Atlanta to get it passed unanimously as law now. So it's no longer just defects policy. It's actually the law now. And I believe, I don't think she necessarily became a principled and capped libertarian or anything like that necessarily, but I think she legitimately saw the error of her ways and wanted to know how to do better. And we told her how, and it was essentially treat these people like people. And then she did it. So that happens as well. But it has been amazing how by appealing to the fact that, like you said, they probably have somehow convinced themselves they're doing the right thing, or they just really try not to think about it. I mean, there are some that are just straight up sociopaths, but most of them aren't. Most of them don't think they're monsters. They think they're doing the right thing. And we find if we can kind of, not so gently nudge them with thousands of people saying, hey, listen, do the right thing here. We'd like to thank you, but I think this is the wrong thing, and we're going to stay on you until you do. It actually works. It's been working wildly successfully.
Now, the individual you mentioned in Georgia, I don't know if she was a political appointee or she was kind of a careerist, but I know, at least from my experience in Maine, it's hard. Like a lot of these political appointees, you're put in charge of a department or an agency, but you have a whole entrenched bureaucracy underneath you that knows that, you're technically on paper in charge, but you're going to be there for a couple of years, and then there's going to be a new governor, and there's going to be a new person in charge, and the bureaucracy is oftentimes the people who are put in charge. It's really difficult to actually what's the word I'm looking for, to restrain, to rear, to get this bureaucracy under control. And if you don't know what the problems are, oftentimes the people underneath aren't going to volunteer those problems. So it sounds like you really helped this person understand what was going on in her own agency.
And that's 100% what it was. Candace Burrows was a political appointee. I believe I'm now, because we've worked with a couple of these different departments. I want to say she either didn't have any experience in child protection, or she didn't have any experience like running a department having to do with it. I want to say it was that she didn't have anything to do with child protection, but either way, she came into a bureaucracy and had no idea what was happening other than what they were telling her, which is why I genuinely believe when she contacted us, it was news to her what was happening. And, the proof's in the pudding. Even though technically she didn't know what was going on, once we gave her, hey, here's what fixes it, she did faithfully execute it. And we've had reported to us that this is now how it is. And we've actually gone to her with other families and said, listen, look at this case yourself. These families didn't do anything wrong. And she killed their cases. She ended their family court cases or ended their defects case, which triggers the ending of the family court case. Because they would draw it from the court. And again, I think she also, and we did, understood that, like you said, at some point now she's gone. Maybe she'll be there another couple years, 5 years, whatever. At some point, she'll not be there anymore, which is why we worked together to make sure that actual legislation got passed that addressed this actually codified it into law instead of just relied on whoever was in charge doing the right thing. So it's really been an incredible thing. And again, it starts with, and this is something I think libertarians, we try to do the opposite because it's how we think. We think when we see something happen, we try to go straight to our principles, right? We go to our libertarian principles, non-aggression, decentralization, private property rights. And then from there, we try to figure out how the policies coming forth from that principle would end up leading to whatever the thing is that we're seeing, the people that are being affected by it. Okay, so we start with principle and then policy and then people. That's the literal opposite way of how everyone else looks at things. They see people, they look for other people to explain the policy that needs to be changed. And then maybe at some point they might actually engage with the principle behind it, but most of them never will actually engage with the principle in any real way in their natural life. And that's very frustrating to us as libertarians because most of us are mildly autistic. And even if we aren't, we tend to focus on principle. Like we're just driven by principle. It's why we're not normal. That's how we think. So at You Are the Power, what we do is we've got the principle in mind and we've got the policy in mind, but we actually start with the people. We start with the family that's being affected. We start with the family who's, having their children taken from them for no good reason. Or start with the woman who spoke at her city council meeting and got arrested in front of her minor daughter and charged with a bunch of bogus charges and is being slandered by all the local op-ed writers who are friends with the mayor. Like, we focus on the actual people that are being affected by this. We get people on board with wanting to help these people, and then we explain what needs to be done from a policy standpoint. Sometimes the policy is just tell these people to back off and leave them alone. But sometimes it's deeper, like in the case with these families, the family separations. And then over time, as we get people on board with helping people through changing policy, over time, we're exposing them to the underlying principle behind it. And to whatever extent they're ever going to actually engage with the principle behind it, and we call it the principle of human respect, but it's the idea that people should be respected as individual human beings and treated thusly. We get a lot more. We are able to get activism done at scale by a bunch of normal people who aren't even necessarily libertarian, at least not yet. And we do it by focusing on people and then guiding them through kind of the way that they approach it, as opposed to the way we do it, starting with principle.
Well, personal stories are very powerful. I mean, unless you're a sociopath, you are at least a little empathetic, and hearing kind of human stories of unfairness. You can often put yourself in that person's shoes, and that
exactly
into action. So I love that you're doing that. Again, I wasn't there for your talk at the Hazlitt Summit, but is this some of what you spoke about? I wonder if there's if this was a problem in Georgia. As you mentioned, it's a problem of a federal incentive from a federal funding. So this is a problem potentially in every state across the country. Is this legislation that you passed in Georgia, is this potentially model legislation that other states should be looking at implementing as well?
It's part of the model for almost every state. But for example, in New Hampshire, we think a change that needs to happen is the elimination of your administrative family courts, because the way that your family courts are run, and this is true in a good number of states, but the way explicitly that your family courts are run, it is arbitrarily, first of all, it violates your state constitution. And second of all, there's no burden of proof. It is arbitrarily whatever the judge decides. And which is why it's actually illegal. They're claiming, well, we aren't actually doing court stuff. We're just making administrative decisions about the children. Except if you ask the average parent, they'd rather go to jail for 20 years than never see their kids again. So you can't say we're not punishing people in here. And so what's happening is they're acting as administrators, but they're using whatever standard they personally want to as a judge. They are allowing hearsay of hearsay while denying actual evidence. There's all these terrible things that are happening in the courts. So that's a big part of it as well. In your system, there needs to be a reintroduction of something at least resembling due process. Here, I'll explain. Keeping with my model of starting with people, the problem is so bad in New Hampshire that if a child is seized in the state of New Hampshire, they are 3 times more likely than in the average state to end up in institutional care settings. And we believe that the reason for that is that they're taking so many kids that it's literally impossible to put them with families. And so they're shoving them into these facilities. There was a facility that they were putting them in Tennessee where they were actually being enslaved. These were children, foster care children that were being enslaved. They were encouraged to they would make them wear different colored jumpsuits and kind of encourage them to form cliques based on those and to fight each other and harm each other.
This was in Tennessee?
This was in Tennessee, but it was New Hampshire children. So they were contracting it out to the facility in Tennessee. Thankfully, they stopped working with that facility, but we don't know where those kids are now. And the worst of all is the so-called Sununu Center, or YDC. Any of your people in New Hampshire that are watching this probably already know about this, but for those who don't, they were basically putting children, including foster children as young as 6, thousands of them, in a prison. It was essentially a prison, and they were calling it an institutional care center. It was a prison. It was an actual prison for children. Some of them there were juvenile offenders, which again doesn't justify treating them that way. but a good number of them were foster children. Again, some of them as young as 6. And without getting too gruesome, things were happening to children that happened to adults in prison for years. And there's now roughly 2,000, just under 2,000 kids who are suing the state of New Hampshire. It could potentially bankrupt the state of New Hampshire with all the lawsuits that are happening, where they can show, unequivocally the horrific things that were done to them. Again, I don't want to repeat them, but just think of the worst things you've heard about happening in prison. Now imagine it happening to a 6-year-old foster care kid. And that's the kind of stuff that's been happening in New Hampshire. So our push is, yes, you got to make sure that parents that are accused of abuse have access to their kids' records. Got to make sure that the people making these accusations have actually viewed their record, have actually reviewed their records. But we also support in the state of New Hampshire specifically eliminating the family court entirely. We also support making DCYF, which is your CPS agency in New Hampshire. They have abused their ability to investigate the crime that is abuse. That should be handled by the police. It's a crime. It's a violent crime. It should be handled by the police using the same standard of evidence collection and investigation that is used by police. And if there is a crime, then it should go to a criminal court, which has the same burden of proof, innocent until proven guilty, and all of that. Obviously, if there's an exigent circumstance where they think a child's health is immediately in danger, their safety is then they can take the children for a very temporary period of time until they can actually prove that it was justified in taking them. And if it wasn't, give the kids back to their parents. DCYF should exist only to provide voluntary services for parents who either as a diversion program or just who are genuinely trying to be better parents, to provide them with classes and support to be able to do that. They and the family courts have more than abused the authority that was wrongfully given to them to investigate these things themselves, and they just shouldn't have it anymore.
Yeah. I certainly have heard some of these stories. I'm still a relative new mover to New Hampshire, so some of these things I don't know all the details of, but I have heard the horror stories about the Sununu. Well, people have come up with different nicknames for that place.
Yeah.
That I don't necessarily want to repeat on this program, but it is. It's alarming. And of course, I will say, we do love to brag about how great New Hampshire is and the freedom that is being built here. But I do think it is always kind of a reminder, and it's worth reminding ourselves that, part of what, our mission is to make New Hampshire more free and to make New Hampshire better and to build a political force here of people who appreciate liberty, who can change for the better some of these institutions that have grown corrupt. And established in their corruption over time. And it sounds like the family court system and some of these institutions are I've heard others raising the alarm bell, and it certainly sounds like as worthy a project to tackle for the better lives for kids as anything. So, Spike, particularly with our audience in New Hampshire, but I know that we have people who tune in from all around the country.
Yeah.
Someone from New Hampshire want to get involved in these reform efforts, or if someone, in any part of the country wanted to get involved in more some of the more general things you guys are looking at, what would you recommend?
Go to youarethepower.net and become a member today. If you want to be involved in being the tip of the spear in activism, go to youarethepower.net/join, and you can become a member today. If you don't necessarily have as much time that you'd like to volunteer, but you'd like to be able to give, and provide the resources we need to do the work that we do, you can go to youarethepower.net/donate and give what you can. We're working soon, I think later this week, we'll have the ability finally to accept Bitcoin and crypto as well. But for now, you can give us your Federal Reserve funny money. It's not worth anything anyway. And if you are in need of help, if your life or the life of someone you know, or even the life of someone you've heard about is being upended by out of control government officials and or bad government policy, go to youarethepower.net/help and fill out our form, and we will look into it. And if there's anything we can do to help, then we will. But yeah, all roads lead to youarethepower.net. Become a part of it. We are the I mean, it doesn't get more effective than 100%. So we are right now among the most effective in helping people who need libertarian solutions now, not in some distant utopian future where libertarians are taking over the world and leaving everyone alone or whatever, but like actually right now. And in doing so, building a movement of people who may or may not, some of them are libertarians, some of them are becoming libertarians, some of them are, but they all intuitively understand that we need to work together to demand that we are treated like people. And in doing so, we're spreading liberty in thought, deed, and action. So if you want to be a part of that, go to youarethepower.net.
Awesome. Spike, I really appreciate you sharing this as such a worthy topic. Any other final words, any parting thoughts you want to share with folks before we wrap up here today?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I would be remiss not to be a witness for Christ. If you like anything that I'm doing, you're inspired by anything I'm doing, just know that anything that is in me that is good is the Holy Spirit and not my own. And if you want to find out more about it, you can reach out to me and ask. I'd love to tell you about it.
All right. Wow, that's a closing pitch, Spike. Well, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. We always love to have you up here in New Hampshire. I know we enjoyed having you up at the Porcupine Freedom Festival last year.
Yes.
I hope that we'll get you back up for some more events in the Free State in the coming year.
I would love that very much. Great to talk with you again, Eric.
All right. Thank you, Spike. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, man. God bless.
All right, everyone. That's the show. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. As I mentioned in the start, we got a lot of great events coming up. The Granite Freedom Track this is September 21st. We've got the Free State Bitcoin Digital Asset Conference and Fall Fest, both Columbus Day weekend in October. So be sure to check those out and get your tickets for those. I did mention briefly, of course, we are the Free State Project is supported by our Porcupine patrons. And we've been doing a big push to grow our Porcupine patrons. These are folks who donate at least $10 a month or $100 a year. And we had a goal of getting to 200 patrons by the end of August. I want to say thank you to everyone who helped and who became a patron themselves. We surpassed that goal. We're at 205. So that's 205 people who believe in the Free State Project mission, who are actively supporting what we are doing. That's supporting programs like these and our entire pipeline, promoting, outreaching, inviting, welcoming, and engaging people from all the way out there in the libertarian diaspora around the world to moving and settling and being active members of our Free State community here in New Hampshire. So if you would like to be a patron, please go to fsp.org/give and you can sign up there. And we give so many perks to our patrons. Not only will you get a Porcupine patron lapel pin, I just put a ton in the mail today because we had so many new patrons signing up. You get access to our patron exclusive Signal group. You get access to our print quarterly newsletter, a monthly patron exclusive conference call with kind of behind the scenes projects that we're working on. And as you scale up your level, there's other perks like complimentary tickets for Free State Project events and so many other things. So you can learn more at fsp.org/give and be a patron for the one libertarian strategy that is achieving liberty in our lifetimes by concentrating those who love liberty in New Hampshire. So thank you again to our guest, Spike Cohen, for being on the show today. Thank you to our producer, Renita, for that fantastic video punching back against Maine Governor Janet Mills, and for, of course, all the production work that goes into this show. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.